The Pacific Ocean, endless blue water stretching to the horizon, calm and beautiful on the surface. But beneath that beauty, in the 1940s, it was the stage for one of the bloodiest, most brutal wars in human history. Here, in this unforgiving expanse of ocean and jungle islands, two mighty empires clashed. Japan, driven by ambition, had surged across Asia and the Pacific, seizing islands, enslaving people, and creating a defensive wall of strongholds. The United States, reeling after the attack on Pearl Harbor, was forced into a war of survival and revenge. The world remembers the battles: Pearl Harbor, Midway, Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, names burned into history. But there is another story hidden beneath those battles, a story not of soldiers charging with rifles, but of men who came with bulldozers, dynamite, and steel. They were called the Seabees, the U.S. Navy's construction battalions. Ordinary men, welders, mechanics, carpenters, crane operators, electricians, men who had built America's highways, skyscrapers, bridges, and factories. But when war came, they traded hard hats for helmets, trained with Marines, carried rifles, and swore an oath not only to fight, but to build. Their motto was simple, powerful, and unforgettable: "We build, we fight." And it was no empty phrase. The Seabees carved runways out of coral rock, blasted through jungle hills, poured concrete under artillery fire, worked in blistering heat, in mud that swallowed trucks, and in nights lit by tracer fire. In one of their most astonishing feats, they built a 6,000-foot-long airstrip in just 20 days. The Japanese could not comprehend it. To them, such construction should take months, maybe years. But the Seabees were not ordinary builders. They were a living symbol of American industry: compact, mobile, relentless. That 6,000-foot strip of asphalt and steel was not just a runway. It was a weapon that allowed American bombers to leap across the Pacific, striking Japan's empire at its very heart. This is their story. The story of how bulldozers and hammers, wielded by men in muddy boots and sunburned faces, changed the course of the Pacific War. The Japanese could not believe it, but history never forgot. The Pacific War was unlike any war fought before. Unlike Europe, with its sprawling railroads, deep ports, and vast industrial centers, the Pacific was an ocean dotted with small, scattered islands, remote, rugged, and often uninhabited. Each was covered in dense jungle, ringed with coral reefs, and battered by relentless heat and rain. Yet these tiny specks of land suddenly became the most valuable real estate on Earth, because of one undeniable truth: airfields win wars. For the Japanese, this truth was obvious from the beginning. After their attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, they surged across the Pacific in a lightning campaign. One island after another fell: Guam, Wake Island, the Philippines, Hong Kong, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies. At each island, Japanese engineers and soldiers quickly constructed airstrips. To the Japanese High Command, every captured island was another fortress in their defensive wall. From these bases, Japanese fighters and bombers could strike American fleets, cut off supply lines, and dominate the skies. For the Americans, this created a nightmare scenario. Every time U.S. Marines or soldiers planned an assault, they faced not only enemy soldiers but aircraft already waiting overhead. Without airfields of their own, American forces would be blind, vulnerable, and slaughtered on the beaches. Admiral Chester Nimitz and General Douglas MacArthur, the two key Allied commanders in the Pacific, both knew the same truth. The United States could never retake the Pacific unless it built airfields as fast or faster than the Japanese. But there was a problem. Building an airstrip in the United States might take months or even years. There were architects, permits, heavy machinery, and long supply chains. In the Pacific, there were no blueprints, no roads to bring in cement trucks, and the construction site was often nothing more than a mangrove swamp, a lava field, or a coral reef. On top of that, Japanese bullets, bombs, and artillery were always waiting. How could runways possibly be built under such conditions? The Japanese believed it couldn't be done. They believed that wherever they built an airfield, it would take the Americans months, perhaps years, to create one of their own. By then, it would be too late, and the Japanese fleet would crush any invasion attempt. But what the Japanese did not know was that the United States had already begun creating a secret weapon, not a weapon of steel or gunpowder, but of men. Men who could build anything, anywhere, anytime. Men who could turn a jungle into a fortress, a beach into a port, and a barren coral atoll into a runway long enough for the most powerful bombers in the world. They were the Seabees, and once they entered the war, the Japanese would watch in disbelief as the impossible unfolded before their eyes. At Guadalcanal, the Marines clung desperately to a half-finished Japanese airstrip called Henderson Field. It became the key to survival. Without planes flying from that strip, the island would have been lost. The Seabees rushed in under fire, repairing runways at night, filling craters with their bare hands when machines broke down, dragging fuel and ammunition through mud under constant attack. At Tarawa, the Japanese believed their defenses were impenetrable. Yet within days of the bloody invasion, Seabees had cleared the wreckage, built makeshift piers, and laid down steel matting to create an emergency landing strip, allowing planes to roar in and strike at the Japanese within hours. And then came the truly astonishing feats, the moments that left the Japanese stunned. On Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, Seabees hacked through jungles, blasted coral hillsides, and in just 20 days created runways stretching 6,000 feet long. Imagine it, 20 days. Just 3 weeks. In less time than it took Japanese planners to design a single campaign, the Americans had carved from the earth a fully functioning airfield capable of launching B-29 superfortresses, the largest bombers in the world, carrying destruction all the way to Tokyo itself. This was not just construction. It was strategy. It was warfare. Every day saved meant lives saved. Every runway built meant the Pacific Fleet could move forward, leapfrogging from one island to the next, pressing closer to Japan's doorstep. And behind it all was the unshakable determination of the Seabees. Men who had once built bridges, factories, and schools back home, now under the burning sun of the Pacific, with rifles slung over their shoulders and sweat pouring from their brows, building victory itself. For the Japanese, it was incomprehensible. Their officers sent frantic reports, unable to understand how Americans were able to build so quickly. Some believed the United States had secretly shipped entire pre-built airstrips, ready to assemble like children's toys. Others thought American machines were magical, powered by something beyond explanation. But the truth was far simpler, and far more powerful. The Seabees embodied the full strength of American industry and ingenuity, compressed into battalions of fighting builders. They were proof that wars are not only won with rifles and bombs, but with bulldozers, concrete, and steel. And their work, those 6,000-foot airstrips built in mere days, would become the foundation upon which the United States pushed across the Pacific, closer and closer to victory. When the Japanese struck Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the United States was suddenly thrust into a global war it had not fully prepared for. Battleships lay smoldering in the harbor, aircraft destroyed on the ground, and over 2,000 Americans killed in a single morning. But as the smoke cleared, America's leaders realized something chilling. This was not only a naval war, or an air war, or even a war of armies clashing on open fields. This would be a war of logistics, a war of supply lines, a war of bases. And for that war, America needed something it did not yet have: an armed construction force. Until that point, construction in war zones had often been handled by civilian contractors. Men from private companies were hired to build bases, lay roads, and dig harbors. But Pearl Harbor changed everything. civilians were untrained for combat. If enemy troops attacked, if bullets flew, those workers were defenseless. International law was clear. Civilians could not take up arms. If they did, they risked being executed as guerrillas, not treated as prisoners of war. The Navy's Bureau of Yards and Docks recognized the danger immediately. They needed builders who could fight back, builders who could wear uniforms, carry rifles, and defend themselves as military personnel. The idea reached Admiral Ben Moriel, a visionary engineer and officer known for his bold thinking. In early 1942, he proposed something radical: the creation of naval construction battalions, military units made entirely of skilled construction workers, trained not only to build, but also to fight. The name stuck quickly. Naval construction battalions shortened to Seabees, and soon everyone was calling them by the name that would echo through history: the Seabees. Unlike most soldiers who were often 18 or 19 years old, the Seabees were older. They were welders, steel workers, miners, electricians, heavy equipment operators, plumbers, carpenters, and mechanics. Many were in their 30s, some in their 40s, and a few were even in their 50s. They were tough men, men who had lived through the Great Depression, who had built America's skyscrapers and bridges, who had labored on Hoover Dam and dug tunnels through mountains. They were used to long hours, dangerous conditions, and backbreaking labor. Now, those same men put on Navy uniforms and trained alongside Marines. The Seabees' training was unlike anything else in the military. They drilled with rifles, machine guns, and mortars. They learned how to defend positions, dig foxholes, and assault beaches. At the same time, they learned how to operate bulldozers, graders, cranes, and blasting charges under combat conditions. Their motto captured it perfectly: Construimus, batuimus. We build, we fight. This was not an empty slogan. It was a promise. When Seabees landed on an island, they didn't wait for it to be secured. They came in with the first waves, often under fire, pushing bulldozers off landing craft while Japanese machine guns rattled from the tree line. If Marines needed cover, Seabees grabbed rifles and fought beside them. If a beach was blocked by obstacles, they wired explosives and blew a path clear. And when the dust settled, they got back on their machines and started building. What made the Seabees so extraordinary was not just their skill, but their spirit. They were men with nicknames, jokes, and rough humor. They painted cartoon bees with sailor caps on their equipment. They worked shirtless in the sun, sweat pouring down their backs, cigarettes hanging from their lips, joking even as shells exploded nearby. But when work had to be done, they never stopped. Bulldozers pushed through jungle. Steamrollers flattened coral. Cranes swung steel into place. Day and night, through rainstorms and sniper fire, the Seabees kept going. There was a saying among Marines: "The difficult we do at once, the impossible takes a little longer." No phrase better captured the Seabees. The first Seabee units deployed in early 1942, barely weeks after the idea was born. They rushed to Guadalcanal, where Marines had seized an unfinished Japanese airstrip. Without the Seabees, Henderson Field would have remained a muddy, bomb-cratered mess. But with them, it became a functioning lifeline for American aircraft. From then on, the Seabees were everywhere. At Bora Bora, Samoa, Espiritu Santo, and countless other remote islands, they hacked through jungles, laid down runways, and built piers from scratch. Every landing, every invasion, behind the riflemen and tank crews, the Seabees followed close behind. And soon, the Japanese began to notice. Reports from enemy intelligence painted a picture that seemed impossible. The Americans could land on an island 1 week, and within days have an airstrip long enough to launch fighters. They could arrive with little more than bulldozers and steel planking, and in weeks have a base that rivaled anything the Japanese had spent months creating. It was a shock to Japanese planners. They had expected the United States to be slow, cautious, methodical. Instead, they found themselves staring at a new kind of warfare, one powered not only by firepower, but by engineering. The Seabees represented something revolutionary in modern war, the fusion of builder and fighter. They weren't just support troops. They weren't rear-line engineers. They were front-line warriors who carried tools as weapons. Their bulldozers were as valuable as tanks. Their hammers hit harder than artillery, because what they built changed the course of battles. And soon, the Seabees would face their greatest challenge yet. A series of operations that would test not only their strength, but their speed, because the United States was preparing to strike deep into Japanese-held territory. To do that, they needed something unprecedented. Airstrips 6,000 feet long, built faster than the Japanese could even react. It would be in this crucible that the Seabees stunned the world and left Japanese commanders shaking their heads in disbelief. The year was 1944. The Pacific War had already raged for nearly 3 years. America had clawed its way across the Solomon Islands, through the deadly reefs of Tarawa, and was now preparing to strike deeper into Japanese territory than ever before. The stakes could not have been higher. The United States needed massive forward air bases to bring the fight to Japan itself. Without them, the war would stall. With them, bombers could soar directly over the Japanese homeland, and that meant the Seabees were about to face the greatest challenge of their lives. Imagine arriving on a Pacific island in 1944. You step off a landing craft and sink ankle-deep into soft, clinging coral sand. The jungle ahead is a wall of green, buzzing with insects, thick with vines, and alive with hidden enemies. The air is hot, humid, and choking. There are no roads, no power, no fresh water. This is not a construction site. This is wilderness. And yet within 20 days, the Seabees were expected to carve from this chaos a runway 6,000 feet long enough for the enormous B-29 Superfortress bombers, each weighing over 120,000 pounds. The Japanese thought it impossible, but the Seabees had no intention of failing. The Seabees' greatest weapons were not rifles, but machines. Bulldozers roared off landing craft, their tracks clanking across the sand, blades biting into coral and jungle alike. Cranes and graders swung into action, clearing rubble, leveling ground, and preparing foundations. Dynamite and blasting powder shattered hillsides, flattening land that had been untouched for millennia. Steel matting, massive interlocking plates called Marston mats, were laid down over soft ground, creating instant runways strong enough to hold the heaviest aircraft. Every machine was vital. Every piece of steel, every gallon of fuel, every box of nails had to be shipped thousands of miles across the Pacific, unloaded under fire, and hauled ashore. But once the machines began to move, nothing could stop them. The Japanese rarely allowed construction to happen in peace. Snipers stalked the tree line. Artillery shelled the beaches. Bombers screamed overhead. At night, the Seabees worked by moonlight or under dim lanterns, filling craters left by Japanese raids. By day, they pushed forward in shifts, men on bulldozers, men with shovels, men laying down mats, while riflemen crouched nearby, ready to return fire. On some islands, Japanese defenders launched full assaults to try and drive them back. But the Seabees didn't break. They picked up rifles, fought alongside Marines, and when the battle was over, they climbed back onto their bulldozers and kept building. It became a saying among frontline troops. The Seabees are the first ashore and the last to leave. Why 20 days? Because time was everything. Every day without a runway meant U.S. forces were vulnerable. Supplies couldn't land. Fighters couldn't protect the fleet. Bombers couldn't reach the enemy. Commanders like Admiral Nimitz and General MacArthur demanded speed. The Seabees responded with around-the-clock shifts. 3 crews rotated on 8-hour schedules, working 24 hours a day without pause. Machines never rested. Neither did the men. Mud, rain, exhaustion, even enemy fire. Nothing slowed them down. By the 10th day, half the runway was cleared and graded. By the 15th, steel matting stretched across the coral base. By the 20th, the final section was laid down, and the first aircraft thundered into the sky. 20 days. Not 20 weeks. Not 20 months. 20 days, from wilderness to war-ready runway. The Japanese could not believe it. Their intelligence officers wrote frantic reports. American engineers have achieved the impossible. At Saipan and Tinian, captured Japanese soldiers admitted they thought it would take the Americans months to build air bases. Instead, within 3 weeks, massive bombers were roaring overhead, striking at Japanese strongholds. One officer reportedly wrote in Disbelief, "It is not humanly possible to build an airfield so fast. The enemy has found a way to cheat nature itself." What they didn't understand was that the Seabees embodied the full weight of American industry. Every bulldozer, every crane, every Marston mat represented factories back home working day and night, shipping a flood of materials across the ocean. The Seabees weren't just building with their hands, they were building with the strength of an entire nation behind them. Nowhere was this clearer than on the island of Saipan. The battle began in June 1944. After weeks of savage fighting, U.S. Marines and Army forces secured the island. But victory meant little without airfields. The Seabees moved in immediately. The Japanese had already built Aslito Airfield, but it was too short and too damaged for American needs. The Seabees not only repaired it, they expanded it. Bulldozers tore into coral, graders leveled new strips, and by the 20th day, runways long enough for the mighty B-29s were complete. From Saipan, American bombers could now strike the Japanese home islands, Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka. The Seabees' speed had changed the entire scope of the war. If Saipan was a triumph, Tinian was a masterpiece. Just 6 miles south of Saipan, the island of Tinian became home to one of the largest airbases in the world. Seabees carved 6 massive runways across its coral plateau, each over 8,000 feet long. From these runways, the B-29s of the 509th Composite Group launched their missions, including the flights of the Enola Gay and Bockscar, the planes that dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Japanese had thought their island fortresses impenetrable. Instead, they had become launching pads for the most devastating strikes of the war. Behind the machinery and statistics were men, tough, determined, and sometimes broken by the strain. On Guadalcanal, Seabees filled bomb craters with coconut logs when machines broke down. They worked waist-deep in mud, laughing through exhaustion. On Iwo Jima, bulldozer operators drove straight through enemy fire to clear landing zones, their blades pushing wreckage aside as Marines cheered them on. On Okinawa, Seabees built roads and runways, while kamikaze planes screamed overhead, crashing into ships offshore. Many Seabees died doing their work. But their sacrifice meant victory for thousands of others. One Marine officer famously said, "Without the Seabees, we could not have gone forward. They gave us airfields, and airfields gave us victory." The sight of a 6,000-foot runway rising from jungle and coral in just 20 days became a symbol of American power. It wasn't just about construction. It was about determination, about proving that no obstacle, nature, enemy, or time could stop the United States once it committed to a goal. The Japanese were astonished. The Americans were inspired, and the Seabees themselves. They simply shrugged, wiped the sweat from their brows, and said, "That's our job." By the summer of 1944, the Pacific had changed. The Japanese military, once confident behind their island fortresses, now watched in disbelief as American forces advanced faster than anyone thought possible. At the heart of that advance were the Seabees, and the runways they built in record time. Those runways were more than strips of steel and coral. They were launching pads for a new kind of war. When the first B-29 superfortress rumbled onto a freshly built runway in the Marianas, the Earth itself seemed to tremble. At over 99 feet long with a wingspan of 141 feet, it was the largest and most advanced bomber the world had ever seen. Four massive Wright R-350 engines roared to life, lifting more than 140,000 pounds of steel and explosives into the air. But the B-29 had one fatal weakness. It needed space. A fully loaded superfortress required runways at least 6,000 feet long, a staggering demand on islands where jungle, coral, and swamps seemed endless. Without the Seabees, the B-29 was a dream on paper. With them, it became a weapon of destiny. On November 24, 1944, just months after the Seabees carved the first great runways into Saipan, 111 B-29 bombers roared into the sky. Their target, Tokyo. For the first time since the Doolittle Raid of 1942, the Japanese capital came under direct attack. But unlike that symbolic raid, this was not a handful of planes. It was an armada. The shock in Tokyo was immense. Air raid sirens wailed. Anti-aircraft guns blazed. Civilians poured into shelters as massive bombs rained down on factories, airfields, and military depots. The Japanese military command was stunned. How had the Americans managed to build such massive bases so quickly? How could Tokyo, hundreds of miles from the front, suddenly be under daily threat? The answer lay on those Seabee-built runways. Japanese planners had believed they had time. Time to reinforce, time to prepare, time to adjust their defenses. But the Seabees stole that time. What the Japanese thought would take months took only weeks. Instead of delaying the American advance, every island captured was transformed into a fortress of steel and concrete almost overnight. The enemy's carefully built defensive lines crumbled. Not because their soldiers lacked courage, but because American engineering moved faster than Japanese strategy could adapt. It was as if the very ground itself betrayed them. If Saipan shocked the Japanese, Tinian broke them. Once seized by American forces, Tinian became the crown jewel of Seabee construction. Within months, it boasted the largest airbase in the world, 6 runways, each over 8,000 feet long, capable of launching hundreds of bombers in a single day. From Tinian, the B-29s unleashed a campaign unlike anything the world had seen. Night after night, bombers rose into the sky, their engines forming a constant thunder that rolled over the island. Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe, all felt the weight of American air power. Industrial districts vanished in firestorms. Railways crumbled. Japan's war machine began to collapse. The Seabees hadn't just built airfields. They had built the very platform from which Japan's defeat would be delivered. But the turning point came at a price. Seabees lived under constant danger. On Tinian alone, Japanese holdouts staged nightly raids, sniping at work crews, setting fires, and trying desperately to sabotage construction. Still the bulldozers pushed forward. Still the graders leveled the earth. Still the mats were laid down, piece by piece, until the runways stretched into the distance like metallic rivers. The men worked themselves to exhaustion, sometimes sleeping in the cabs of their bulldozers or beside their trucks, too tired to return to camp. Many would never see home again. Yet their sacrifice meant that airmen thousands of miles away could take the fight to the heart of the enemy. By 1945, the psychological impact was undeniable. For the first time in the war, Japanese civilians faced the terrifying reality that the war was no longer distant. It was above their homes, in their cities, in their very skies. The March 9-10 Tokyo firebombing raid, launched from Seabee-built runways, became the deadliest air raid in history, killing an estimated 100,000 people in a single night. The Japanese military, already stretched thin, could no longer protect the homeland. Every new airfield built brought the war closer, the destruction heavier, and surrender nearer. The Seabees themselves never sought glory. They didn't appear in war propaganda as much as Marines or Navy pilots. They weren't showered with medals in front of cameras. But within the military, their reputation became legendary. Generals and admirals openly admitted that without the Seabees, the Pacific Campaign would have stalled. They built the roads, the ports, the hospitals, the runways, one officer said. They built the war itself. The Japanese could not understand how Americans built so fast, so relentlessly. But the truth was simple. The Seabees lived by their motto: we build, we fight. The construction of those 6,000-foot airstrips in 20 days was more than engineering. It was the turning of the tide. Before, Japan believed in defense in depth, island by island, fortress by fortress. After the Seabees, that strategy collapsed. Every captured island became an American stronghold. Every new runway brought Japan closer to destruction. Every day shaved off construction was a day the Japanese could not recover. The Seabees didn't just build airstrips. They built victory itself. When the smoke cleared over the Pacific Islands, the Seabees had left behind more than just concrete, steel, and coral. They had left a legacy of unparalleled construction under fire, the results of which would echo long after the last shot was fired. By the end of World War II, the Seabees had built an astonishing network of bases, airfields, and infrastructure that stretched across thousands of miles of ocean. Their achievements were staggering. Over 400 advanced bases constructed across the Pacific. 111 airstrips built or repaired, including the monumental 6,000-foot runways on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. 441 ammunition magazines, allowing munitions to be stored safely and efficiently. 700 square blocks of warehouses, supporting the massive supply chains needed to feed millions of troops. Hospitals with 70,000 beds, ensuring wounded soldiers had access to medical care in the middle of a war zone. Fuel tanks capable of holding 100 million gallons, keeping ships, trucks, and aircraft supplied in remote locations. These were not just numbers. Each statistic represented a life saved, a battle won, a plane in the sky, and a soldier kept alive. The Seabees' speed and efficiency fundamentally changed the Pacific War. Before their arrival, Japanese defenders had hoped to slow the American advance by relying on geography. Coral reefs, dense jungles, volcanic rock. They believed that construction and supply lines would be the bottleneck. But the Seabees turned these natural obstacles into assets. They flattened jungles, blasted hills, filled craters, and built roads across previously impassable terrain. Every newly built airstrip allowed American bombers to fly deeper into enemy territory. Every pier allowed supplies and reinforcements to reach the front faster. Every base provided a sanctuary where soldiers and Marines could regroup, heal, and strike again. By the summer of 1945, the Japanese home islands were within range of B-29 bombers operating from Seabee-built runways. The speed and scale of Seabee construction had accelerated the war, compressing what might have been years into months. The cost to the Seabees was immense. Thousands of men worked in blistering sun, torrential rain, and toxic mud. Mosquitoes, disease, heat stroke, and malnutrition claimed lives as surely as bullets and artillery. Many Seabees suffered injuries, crushed limbs, burns, or severe lacerations, but returned to work as soon as possible. For every plane that took off from a Seabee-built runway, there was a man who had spent sleepless nights laying steel mats, clearing coral, and leveling hills. Many of these men would remain unsung heroes, their stories hidden in the pages of military archives, their faces unseen by the world they had helped save. The Seabees' work was not limited to airstrips. They built roads connecting isolated islands, allowing troops and supplies to move efficiently. They constructed hospitals, bridges, docks, and fuel depots, creating self-sustaining bases that could endure the harshest conditions. Their ingenuity extended to problem-solving on the fly. On some islands, fresh water was nearly impossible to find. The Seabees dug wells, built storage tanks, and even devised improvised desalination methods to supply troops. When conventional materials were unavailable, they made do with what nature offered: coral, bamboo, and steel scraps, transforming them into functional infrastructure. It was this adaptability that made them indispensable. While the world saw Marines storm beaches or B-29s drop bombs, the Seabees were quietly ensuring those operations were possible. By August 1945, with atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the Japanese surrender imminent, the Seabees had transformed the Pacific theater. They had enabled air campaigns that crippled Japan's war machine, built the infrastructure necessary for amphibious assaults, and ensured that supply lines remained intact across thousands of miles of ocean. The Japanese had witnessed the impossible: airfields rising in weeks instead of months, fortifications replaced by launch pads for bombers, jungles transformed into military hubs. Their disbelief was recorded in diaries and intelligence reports. The Seabees' reputation was one of awe, a blend of fear, respect, and sheer incomprehension. For the Allies, the Seabees had been a decisive force. The combination of American industrial power and the Seabees' ingenuity meant that the Pacific War could be fought and won, island by island, runway by runway, day by day. When the war ended, many Seabees returned home quietly. They resumed civilian lives as contractors, engineers, and laborers, carrying the lessons of combat construction with them. Yet the military infrastructure they built continued to serve a purpose. Former airstrips became commercial airports, harbors became trade ports, and roads linked islands long after the war had ended. The Seabees' work was a testament to human endurance and ingenuity. In an environment where most thought construction impossible, they built bases, airfields, and roads that changed the course of history. And in every tale of victory in the Pacific, Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Tinian, Okinawa, the Seabees' contribution was quietly woven into the triumph, a backbone without which the war might have dragged on for years. The story of the Seabees is more than a tale of engineering triumph or military necessity. It is a story of human ingenuity, determination, and resilience in the face of near-impossible odds. The Japanese commanders who witnessed their feats often expressed disbelief. How could a nation seemingly hundreds of miles away, in a matter of weeks, turn barren coral islands into operational airfields capable of supporting the most advanced bombers in the world? To them, it was almost supernatural. Some thought the Americans had brought entire prefabricated airfields in crates, ready to assemble like toys. Others believed American machines had powers beyond explanation. Yet the truth was profoundly human. It was skill, courage, and relentless effort. The Seabees combined knowledge of construction, adaptation to extreme conditions, and the ability to improvise under fire. They were not performing magic. They were performing engineering miracles born from discipline, teamwork, and an unwavering commitment to the mission. Every island presented new challenges. On some, volcanic rock had to be blasted and leveled. On others, coral reefs needed to be crushed and spread across swamps to form stable runways.